Good morning, everybody. For those of you who do not know me, I'm John Brower. I'm your chairman of the board for the Missoula Area Chamber of Commerce. I'd like to thank you all for coming this morning. Give you just a brief background as to how this current business issues forum has started through the chamber and what our plans are for the future with regard to current business issue forums. We originally started this thought process through our Governmental Affairs Committee, and we thought that it would be a really nice way to reach out to our membership and educate our membership with regard to issues and involve many of our community leaders in this process. And so Nick Kaufman is our leader of our legislative division, and a lot of this has come about through Nick's leadership. And Nick, we certainly appreciate your thought process in this. Welcome. We appreciate all of the panel members that have taken the time out of their day to be here today, and thank you guys for being here. And without any further delay, I'll introduce our MC, Nick Kaufman from WGM Group.
Thank you,
Thanks,
John.
Nick.
Would you do that again? Thanks. I have a few fans out here. Welcome. Good morning. We have an annual event called the State of Missoula, and at the State of Missoula, we broke into tables, and the tables thought of some contemporary topics they wanted to ask our panel at the State of Missoula. And one of those first questions was, hey, there's a lot of stuff going on in Missoula, and there's lots of traffic improvements, and there's great things going on in the downtown, but how do we get from where we live to where we need to shop and work and get services? And it was Mary Ellen Campbell that asked that question. And so the Legislative Committee decided in some previous discussions that the State of Missoula is a pretty important thing relative to the Chamber. It helps inform our members. And so what we decided is through the year we try to have forums on contemporary topics that would help. I did try that. I think Mr. Kaplan snuck into my pocket and took care of that. And so anyway, this is the first of a series of forums that we help inform local business people and members of the Chamber of Commerce on important issues in our community. And so this is a topic on transportation and economic development. So how many people have been in Missoula for the last 15 years? All right, and so Missoula has changed, right? We don't have export industries here anymore. We used to be a resource-based community with timber products and processing timber products from plywood to 2x4s and studs to paper. That's gone. The resource export is gone, and the industries that process that resource are also gone. As we look at our economy, then we have the University of Montana, we have our 2 hospitals in healthcare, and we have some other great sectors in the economy, right? Transportation becomes very important to us, and not just transportation, how we move goods and services through Missoula, but transportation projects in Missoula which help provide jobs. Okay, all right. So I'd like to briefly introduce our panel. So this is Mike McKay. Mike is a manager of marketing for Montana Railway, and that's the railroad track that goes through Missoula. Okay. Mike's going to talk to us about rail. Sten Sohlberg is the owner of Jones Brothers Trucking, and so trucking has been a big part of transportation and jobs in Missoula historically, but it's changed. You're not hauling chemicals into the paper mill or logs and 2x4s the other way, so we'll hear what it means to you. And then Chris Jensen is the manager of the Missoula International Airport. He's been there for a while, doing a great job, keeping airlines going from here to Las Vegas and Oakland and San Francisco and other points. And then Jason Wiener is the ward representative for Ward 1, which is northeastern Missoula. He's been on the city council for a couple of terms
5 years
now, and heads up the Public Works Committee for the Missoula Area Chamber of Commerce. So that's going to be our panel. The format for today is pretty simple. Each of these presenters will talk to you about their field of interest, and then we're going to break for a while. You're going to break into groups, right? And you're going to come up with questions that you'd like to ask this panel of experts, okay? Come up with at least 2 or 3 questions, if you will, because each table will ask one question, and if Steve's table asks your question, you won't get to participate. So let's get a couple of questions. Okay, so with that, I'd like to start today, and our first speaker is Mike McKay. I'll tell you a little bit about Mike. Mike graduated from Flathead High. Brave, right?
That's right.
All right, I got that correct, didn't I?
Or at least it was slightly
1987.
courageous.
There you go. You worked with professional runners as a certified athletic trainer for Mountain West, so the Missoula Marathon is kind of an important thing to you.
We've got a couple of people that organized that, Rand.
All right. And you migrated into the field of aviation, serving as vice president of North Star Jet here in Missoula. So North Star is a big part of our job base here in Missoula too. You survived the aviation industry and the dramatic changes that occurred after the events of 9/11. So glad to see that you did that. And you accepted a position in Montana Railing. And you've been with Montana Railing for 8 years. And it's easy for you, I guess, to look back and see that the move to Railing was a good one.
Great.
All right? And so Mike and his wife Joy, who's a physical therapy graduate, have been married for nearly 26 years. All right. They have 2 kids at Big Sky High School, and they enjoy the Missoula community and all 4 seasons. Mike?
Keep reading.
Oh, good red wine.
Yeah.
And recreational options, and president of Western Montana. You are a marketing person, aren't you?
Yeah.
All right.
Yes. Yeah.
Manager of marketing, Montana Railing. Mike?
Pardon me for just a moment here. So greetings, everybody. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to come here and be with this group and to be able to take the opportunity to learn a little bit about these different industries and what we do in our economy here in Missoula and beyond, really. I want to thank Steve Maurer for helping get this put together in the chamber, for sure, for creating these forums and these opportunities for us all. Again, my name's Mike McKay, and I'm a manager of sales and marketing, and you probably wonder first, what does a manager of sales and marketing do for the railroad? There are 3 of us at Montana Railing that deal with our commodities that we handle on our system, and we work to develop our existing customer base as well as any new potential customers, trying to help for opportunities for growth and expansion in the markets of transportation of freight. And we are a freight railroad. MRL is part of the Washington companies. In the Washington companies, there's transportation where MRL's at. There's real estate, equipment, environmental, and of course mining. And with this, where Montana Railing fits into this picture is that we are part of this common carrier network of rail across North America. There's 7 Class 1 railroads in North America. The 2 primary western-centered railroads are the Union Pacific and the Burlington Northern Santa Fe. We are part of the Burlington Northern Santa Fe system. The BNSF Railway has 33,000 miles of network. They connect with all the other railroads too. And we are a link. That's where Montana Railing comes up with. We're a link in that network. So if you want to ship something from Montana Railing, you can go anywhere that this map indicates. Or vice versa, if you want to bring something in, you could land it on Montana Railing. And it's important to note that as we are really connected with the Burlington Northern Santa Fe, they are our biggest customer. 2/3 of our business that we do is what we would consider bridge traffic related. And I want to spend just a couple moments talking about bridge traffic. Oftentimes you'll see BNSF locomotives that are going across the system, or the rail system as I'll refer to it. And those locomotives are coming typically from, as an example, a loaded train, a unit train of, let's say, corn from perhaps Nebraska. And it's going to the West Coast for export, going to, could go anywhere, to the Pacific Rim or somewhere. And as it comes to us at Montana Railing, as the BNSF routes that train to the West Coast, they'll bring it to us in Laurel. And their locomotive engineers will get off. Our crew will get on. We'll mechanically inspect that train for safety purposes, and then that train will go across our system. We'll stop for crew changes as necessary, for refueling as necessary. We'll take it as far as Spokane, where we'll interchange it back to the BNSF. Our guys get off, their crew gets on, and then they'll take it on westbound from there. Same thing happens in reverse on an empty grain train. And that's kind of a huge component of what we do. Again, 2/3 of our business is tied to that bridge-related traffic. Let's drill down a little bit to Montana Rail Link. I guess I don't want to do this. I'll restart later. We have 937 miles of track that we maintain and operate. We're 100% responsible for all the cost going into taking care of this railroad. And we run from a place called Jones Junction on this east end out by Huntley, and our operating area goes to Sandpoint, Idaho. The BNSF doesn't want to interchange with us in Sandpoint, Idaho, so we actually interchange at Laurel and trade there with them, with their crews, and then we haul into Spokane. And that's where they'd rather interchange, just as a larger crew base for them. We also interchange a few trains with the BNSF at Garrison, Montana, and those trains will go down south towards Butte, interchange with the Union Pacific in a rail station called Silverbow. So that's essentially our 937 miles. You'll notice Montana Rail Link on the southern route covering the state of Montana. We serve and go through 4 of the 7 largest communities in Montana, and arguably 4 of the healthiest economies in the state of Montana, in Missoula, Helena, Bozeman, and Billings. Kalispell, Great Falls, Butte are the other 3 of those economies and communities. Arguably, they're not doing as well as we are in these 4 that are served by Montana Rail Link. We are, like I said, 100% responsible for anything that happens. If a bridge goes down, a derailment occurs, it's washed out by flooding, any of those sorts of things, it's 100% on us to get that opened up and functioning, and it's our livelihood. So we put a lot of effort into that, making sure that the railroad's safe on a regular basis. We have currently 53 of our 96 locomotives that we own are in service, and we try to run the fleet lean. Through the economic downturn we all faced, we're in a situation where we all have to be careful of every dollar we spend, making sure that we're doing the right things with that. And of those 53 locomotives, I'll get into this a little bit later in my conversation here, but we are trying to be as efficient as we can with that, and I'll talk to that. We have a little over 1,300 freight cars that we have in our fleet. We also have the Burlington Northern Santa Fe's larger fleet of box cars and different types of rail cars that are at our disposal as well. So if a company wanted to start up and they wanted to use system box cars, as we'll call them, that conversation would happen with us, but we would work with the Burlington Northern Santa Fe to help make sure that rail cars could be supplied. A lot of companies now are being pressed into getting their own cars as part of the everybody having some skin in the game, so that the customer and the railroad are more collaborative and more of a partnership in how we're doing that. And that's being driven by the BNSF Railroad. So we have, last year we ran about 320,000, just short of 320,000 loaded rail cars across our system. And that equates out to about 15 trains a day. Half of them loaded, half of them are empty. And conversely, with the trucking industry, where the big push is to get loads both ways, that doesn't work real well with the railroad, because rail cars have one commodity in them. There's cross-contamination. The bulk that we're moving, it's really hard to get the commodity completely cleaned out, so that it's hard to make a backhaul, if you will, and make that really work. So half of the trains are loaded and half are empty, kind of just as a general rule of thumb. We will be 25 years old this Halloween. We started up in 1987 when we took over this southern route from the Burlington Northern Santa Fe. And we have about 950 employees, 350 employees in the greater Missoula area, and with an average payroll of about $67,000. That's over $23 million a year of payroll into the greater Missoula area. And so I think we are a big component of this economy here. With 950 employees across the system, it's about $64 million annual payroll in the communities that we serve. And that it's not just money going in. It's we really encourage our employees and our companies really engaged with the groups in the civic areas that we deal with. Currently, we have a high rate of people that are engaged with the United Way and giving to the United Way and the agencies that the United Way serves. We help as a primary sponsor of the Watson Children's Shelter here locally with their big event that's coming up on May 12th, which is the Bike for Shelter. And we're actively engaged with Watson on that. We are actually putting on a silent auction with the goals of raising money for the Missoula Youth Homes here. And that's an online internal silent auction that we're going to do to help raise money from our employees for Missoula Youth Homes. So let's talk a little bit about Montana Rail Link. I said 2/3 of our business is tied to the BNSF. That means 1/3 of it's left to do what? And that's on our own railroad, where we actually haul forest products, both finished and raw products. And I was talking to somebody a little bit earlier about this, and I'll just diverge here just for a second. You want to know how the economy is doing. One of our leading indicators is rail traffic is looking at what we call center beams, or exposed cars that you can see the product on them. They're a flat car, and you'll see the finished lumber that's all packaged. You see all that white lumber. You'll recognize that there's more of that happening right now. A lot of that's going across us, westbound, product from west going eastbound into the heartland. And that's where most of that growth is happening right now. And there's more of those cars, more frequency. That's a good thing for all of us too. So forest products, we deal with grains, corn, soybeans, wheat, both for feed and for food consumption, fertilizers to help with those crops. Energy-related products, liquid and solid, both in coal and petroleum coke and petroleum gas. And then my favorite, of course, rocks. That is my commodity group that I serve. And when I first came on to Montana Rail Link and I was told I was going to be dealing with rocks, it didn't sound overly exciting. But let me tell you, it's quite a lesson in the state of Montana and what the treasure state really is. And I deal with cement and lime, talc, gypsum, ores, aggregates, all kinds of different rocks, things that are mined and dug out of the ground and done in a real good way in the state of Montana. Interesting note, we have two talc plants down in Sappington and Three Forks, down in that area. And they have a mine called the Yellowstone Mine down by Ennis. It's the purest deposit of talc in North America. And they ship worldwide. I was visiting with Sten a little bit about this. We have about half of their freight on rail, half of their freight goes on truck, and they do in the neighborhood of 6,000 to 7,000 truckloads a year out of that area. It's probably outside of when Smurfit Stone closed down, it's probably the biggest single export that we have coming out of the state of Montana. Let me dive into a couple other things. Safety. We're extremely concerned about safety on our railroad. It's our highest priority, and we're working diligently to make sure that we are staying safe in terms of functioning on the railroad. Last year, we were awarded the Most Improved Safety Award, where we have 0.62 injuries per 200,000 man-hours of labor. 6 injuries total for the year. All 6 of those employees returned back to work. So highly safe, as well as operational lifesaver. If we had more time, I'd dive into that more. I want to talk just briefly about the environmental aspect of what we do, and that is these locomotives. The second locomotive that you'll see here, we installed, these are our older generation locomotives, we installed auxiliary power units, reducing emissions out there by 90% in idle, when those locomotives are in idle mode. In the Missoula area, 100% of the locomotives that are here have idle reduction technology on board now. And when they're in idle mode, which they have to be in order to keep fluid circulating, they will burn about 4 to 5 gallons of diesel per hour. With these APUs on it, now it's down to a half of a gallon per hour. And when we get above 40 degrees Celsius, the APU will actually shut off the locomotive, because 40 degrees Fahrenheit, is where we need to be in order to not have to have those fluids circulated. So at that point, we're at 100% savings in terms of fuel consumption and emissions produced. So what I'd like you to take away from today's little visit here is that I believe that we are a great community partner in terms of the companies we work with, as well as the revenue that's given out through our employees and through payroll. We're a solid employer both here and across the state. We're progressive in terms of our safety and our environmental efforts that we put forth. And I think that we're a low-cost provider of freight transportation service, valuable asset to the state.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So you didn't tell the whole story. So there's the multimodal aspect of Montana Rail Link with the trail system along the Bitterroot Branch through town. The permissions from the railroad for the pedestrian bridges at Scott Street and what you do there. Mike Halligan, YMCA, Partners in Youth, community-focused, multimodal freight carrying.
When Steve pared this down from 15-minute talk to 10, that's an awfully difficult thing to do Railroad 101 in 10 minutes.
You did it
but-
well, Mike.
Yeah.
All right, big hand for
Thank
Mike
you.
once again. So Sten Sohlberg, come on up. I'll talk about you and they can look at you and then they'll be listening to you when you first speak. Fine figure of a fellow. So Sten was educated, went to school. He was in the last class at Lincoln School in Rattlesnake. Pretty cool, right? Hoagie Knight. Attended the University of Colorado in Boulder. Started his career in trucking at Northwest Transport in Denver in 1992. He returned to Missoula in 1996 after spending 10 years in Colorado and started working for Bitterroot International Systems. In the spring of 1998, Sten started Jones Brothers Trucking. Jones Brothers is a flatbed trucking operation covering the 48 lower states and all of Canada. In 55 trucks, 14 employees are based in Missoula. Sten recently became the sole owner of the company. Entrepreneur, trucker, talk to us about what you do.
Thank you, Nick, and thank you everybody for being here. I appreciate you taking the time to come down and hear us. So how does trucking fit into the national and local economy? Actually, trucking covers about 70% of all freight transported across the U.S., so it's huge. It generates about $255 billion annually. That's about 5% of GDP. The thing that is really amazing is that there are 500,000 trucking companies out in the United States. Of these, 96% have fewer than 28 trucks. 82% of those have fewer than 6 trucks. So you can see that the trucking industry is made up almost entirely of small businesses. But because of this, it's a very fractured and disorganized industry. Trucking companies only seem to be united in their competition with each other. In July of 1980, Jimmy Carter signed the Motor Carrier Act, which deregulated trucking. Up to this point, the government, through the Interstate Commerce Commission, controlled all entry and all rates that trucking companies could charge. After deregulation, anybody with a CDL and a truck could go into the trucking industry, and many thousands did. After the completion of the interstate system in the 60s and 70s, that gave trucking the transportation infrastructure to take advantage of this new freedom that they felt in deregulation. And the industry expanded mightily to meet the demand of the expanding economy. Some trucking advocates would even say that deregulation of trucking was responsible for the economic expansion of the 80s and 90s. It's been said that the health of the trucking industry nationwide leads the national economy by 12 to 18 months. So trucks move 70% of the freight nationwide, and they carry the building blocks of the national economy. And it takes time for manufacturers to take those building blocks and take them from raw materials and turn them into economic activity. So they're leading that way. And the corollary is also true. When trucks stop transporting goods, it takes time for industry to work through their inventory and show some economic decline. So the economics of trucking operates on a pure supply and demand dynamic. Because of deregulation, the only thing determining capacity in the trucking industry is the demand for trucking services. Low margins in trucking don't allow for much variation, and the industry average is less than 5% profit. So when the number of trucks begins to eclipse the demand for trucking services, there's an intense competition to hold on to that business. When there's great competition and business is going down, rates fall almost immediately. Trucking companies go out of business when they can't raise their rates and cover their expenses. When demand returns, capacity immediately comes back and trucks are back on the road and the health of the industry comes back. Excuse me. Though trucks have always carried the building blocks of our national economy, I would argue that it has only recently become a more reliable indicator. The wild swings in the industry immediately following deregulation have lately begun to level out. Many in trucking are becoming more wise to the business cycle, and there are some rising barriers to entry which have slowed the reaction times in relation to demand. So if this industry is a good predictor of the national economy, what's happening now? Well, after the Great Recession, I believe that trucking has reached a minimal equilibrium. We're at a low level of demand, which is matched with a reduced capacity in the industry. And I think that equilibrium kind of started about the first quarter of 2011 and has stayed steady since. And even though we've been assured that the recession is over, we've seen almost no growth in demand. So unfortunately, I can't report that there are indications that the national economy is going to take off anytime soon. But what I can say is that the steady business that we've seen over the last year shows that the economy is somewhat stable and may be advancing slowly. The trucking industry in Missoula grew up around lumber and wood products, and when I-90 was completed in the mid-1960s, it allowed lumber producers to reach new markets all across the country via truck. This opportunity allowed for great expansion in trucking in Missoula, and it has only recently declined with the decline in production of wood products. The closure of Stimson Lumber, Smurfit Stone, and the like have changed what Missoula trucking companies can rely on for business in Missoula. Most companies that have survived, and many have not, have had to diversify to industries outside Missoula. And I really doubt that Missoula trucking industry will ever again be tied to local industry. Trucking will remain as a major contributor to Missoula's economy, both with the hundreds of direct jobs and more people employed as vendors supporting Missoula truckers. That's all I've got.
So Sten, while you're up here, I have a question. You know, the economist in me wants to say that Mike's industry hauls large quantities of material and they break bulk and we put them on trucks and distribute them. But is there a relationship between Montana Rail Link and your trucking company in terms of what they carry? Do they ever offload onto your trucks and you distribute them to other parts of the country or the region?
My company does not.
Okay.
We do not, so.
All right. Well, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
All right. Chris Jensen, come on up. Always smiling. This is the man that lets you go to Las Vegas for that very reasonable flight on Allegiant. But let's
All right.
come on over here where they can see.
I got to get my technology going.
I want to talk to you a little bit about Chris. So Missoula International Airport is a 2,700-acre commercial service airport served by 4 airlines, 3 air cargo carriers, 2 fixed-base operators. The airport is home to a large general aviation population, the smoke jumpers, the USDA Forest Service, Homestead Helicopters, Aerotronics, NOAA, and Museum of Mountain Flying, excuse me. Another record-breaking year was achieved in 2012. 582,000 passengers through the terminal. That's great. And you kind of reorganized how the terminal works too, didn't you?
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah. MSO, the director, Chris Jensen, is responsible for the overall management of activities under the jurisdiction of the Missoula County Airport Authority. You've got a board, right?
Correct.
Prior to assuming his position in 2005, Chris held the position of airport director in Elko, Nevada. Chris received a bachelor's degree in aeronautical studies from Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University in Prescott, Arizona, Mr. Jensen holds a private pilot certificate and was named Airport Executive of the Year in 2011 by the Northwest Chapter of the American Association of Airport Executives. Chris and his wife and 3 children live in the Bitterroot Valley. Chris Jensen.
Thanks, Nick. That was certainly a rousing, probably the best introduction I've ever had. I appreciate that. So I'm going to see if I can figure my way out of this, because I also have a PowerPoint presentation that I plan to bore you with. There it is. And I also would like to start off by saying thank you for having me here and helping me figure this out, right? No, there we go. Okay. So obviously we don't have a lot of time, and I wanted to focus a little bit on economic activity. That's what Steve and I talked about. I decided it didn't make sense to talk in general terms about the airport. So I really want to talk more about one specific topic. And I'll give you some general background information, but just very briefly. If you really want to know more, we can talk about that later. But what I will talk about is the economic impact of a low-cost carrier in our community. So with that, the background information that you need to know about our airport is that we have currently today 11, or starting on Friday actually, 11 nonstop destinations in our community. So that's equivalent to what Spokane has. I always find that shocking, and people always seem to agree that that's a little bit surprising. A community much larger than ours, the size of Spokane, has essentially the same number of nonstop destinations that we have. Now, yes, some of ours are seasonal, some of theirs are seasonal, so there's some differences in there. The one thing that they have that we don't have is that low-cost carrier. And in their case, it's Southwest Airlines and Frontier Airlines. Both are considered a low-cost carrier. Now, Southwest isn't coming here, I'm sorry to say. Not anytime soon. We all want them. We talk to them. Brian meets with them. Brian, our deputy director in the back of the room, has met with them numerous times. They say nice things to us and then show us the door. So, what are we going to do? Well, there are other low-cost carriers, and Nick's getting up, so I'm getting nervous.
Oh, yeah. Take your time.
So there are other low-cost carriers in the industry. Southwest we talked about. AirTran was recently acquired by Southwest, so we really have one less now. Frontier, which is really in the end going to be the focus of this conversation, and JetBlue, which is a carrier that's really based on the East Coast. It does have a little West Coast service, but not a lot, and really nothing in our neighborhood at the moment. So this is a slide. I'm sorry that it's probably a little bit difficult to read, but this is really important to you, the travelers, because you're the ones that are paying the price to fly on the airlines in and out of Missoula. So if you look at this, at the high end is Fairbanks, Alaska, not surprisingly, and I know it's hard to read, but it's $522 each way for an airfare. It's a lot of money. At the low end is Atlantic City, and it's $148. In the middle, roughly, is Missoula, and it's $384, even though I think it's difficult to read. And you can see we're a little bit above average. This line represents average at 328. So we pay more as citizens of Missoula and western Montana than what the average person in the United States pays. Are you surprised, any of you? Yeah, I'm sure. I see all the heads. No, I know. This one is probably even more important to us because this is what we pay in comparison to communities around us. So not surprisingly, Spokane, because they have that competition that we talked about, is on the low end at $300. On the high end, not surprisingly, is Butte. We are actually at $384 on the lower end, but you need some additional information. We're on the low end because Allegiant Airlines flies more service in and out of Missoula than any of the other communities, and so they tend to suppress our prices, but only on very specific markets: LA, Phoenix, Vegas, now Oakland. This is a slide as business people that you're more interested in. If you look, you see Missoula with our average fare at $250 to $4. Bozeman, their average fare at $194. Now what do they have that we don't have? They have Frontier Airlines. Billings, $191. Same story, Frontier Airlines. And if you look, these are more traditional business type markets: Atlanta, Chicago, Dallas, and on down the line. So obviously, as business people, this is of concern to you. Now, if we all did business in Phoenix and Vegas and LA and soon to be Oakland, and we could go, twice a week on whatever schedule Allegiant dictates, then we're in pretty good shape. But that probably doesn't work for the majority of you. So, with that in mind, what are we as a community to do? Well, what we're seeing is a lot of communities are now reaching out and becoming more aggressive than they've ever been to attract a low-cost carrier. In our case, we're really only focused on one because there's only one that really potentially is going to offer service to our market, and that would be Frontier. Frontier has about 68 different markets that they connect to out of Denver. So that means that you're able to go from Missoula, if we were to land this service, Denver, and then beyond, all within their Frontier system. So you get those lower prices that are offered by the low-cost carrier. And not only that, but a lot of times a competing service, so say for example in Salt Lake City, where Delta has a hub, Frontier also flies there. So a lot of times Salt Lake will match the Frontier pricing. So it has the general effect of reducing our prices overall. Okay, so this is the hard part of the conversation. What we're seeing now is that communities are working on ways to incentivize airlines to come to their communities. And what we call that is really risk mitigation. When an airline starts service in a community, it requires a period of time before it becomes financially successful or positive. And so what communities are doing are looking at ways to mitigate that risk, to help the airline get into the market and that first part of the operation where it's not profitable, kind of help share that risk, if you will. And they do that in a number of different ways: revenue guarantees, travel banks, marketing support, and fee waivers. And we don't really have a lot of time. I don't want to get into the details of those. But I will tell you that we have had some communities that are close to us that you all know very well that are doing this now. And now we are in the same position. We're starting to have these conversations and putting together an effort to do the same thing. So here's one of those examples, one of those communities that we talked about. Bozeman landed Frontier back in 2008. Incidentally, Frontier announced that they were coming to Missoula at the same time. They then went into bankruptcy, came out of bankruptcy, continued with their plan to go to Bozeman, but did announce that they weren't going to be able to come to Missoula. What was the difference? Well, the difference was that Frontier received a $145,000 revenue guarantee from the community of Bozeman. So Missoula, we weren't giving them anything. Bozeman was, and in the end, it's obvious they got the service, we did not. So this is just quickly what it means to us, and I'm trying to make sure I stay within my time here, so I'll go quick. So this is what happened to their fares when Bozeman entered the market. Bozeman went down 11. At the same time, we went down 4%, mostly related to Allegiant. The national average was flat during that time. So you're looking 2007 first quarter to 2010 first quarter. This is the change in the traffic. So in other words, passengers. So Bozeman's traffic went up 6%. Ours went down 4%. The national average went down 9%. This is the slide that should be most important to all of you. This is the impact of the fares to people in the Bozeman community when Frontier entered that market. So these are real dollars that they were saving. They're no longer paying. So they saved annually $8.3 million because Frontier entered the market, brought the fares down. If we were to get the service, it looks to us in our estimates right now that we would save about $4.5 million collectively. Big number. Quickly, Great Falls. Great Falls just announced that they now have Frontier service starting this summer. The way they were able to do that is they were able to give a community-based effort to raise $300,000 to mitigate risk, to get Frontier to start the service. Their airfares, this is the important thing. The day the service starts, as soon as it was announced, on the day that the service starts, it was the end of this month, I believe, dropped 40% overnight. So it's an immediate effect. This is, again, a Bozeman example, or I'm sorry, this is Newport News, Virginia, and maybe I'll just skip over this one real quick. This is another airport example, and this was Bloomington, Illinois, and then this is the one I actually wanted to get to. This again is Bozeman. They've become very aggressive. The community raised $688,000 combined with a grant from the federal government. There are grants that we can use that actually allowed them to get nonstop service from New York City to Bozeman. It's once a week, it's seasonal, but it's a start. And typically what happens is you try to get the service in and then grow the service. And so, again, at Bozeman being very aggressive. And with that, hopefully I stayed within my time and look forward to answering any questions you might have when the time comes. I was a little ahead.
Thank you, Chris. Jason Wiener. I've got 3 pages on Jason, but since he successfully was reelected last fall, I probably don't have to say anything to him. So I'll talk a little bit about Jason here. And so Jason comes to us from the public sector, and in Missoula, Montana, we have a lot of public sector, private sector partnerships. And he pointed out to me one day in a very serious and very careful way at the same time that the jobs in local government are important to our economy too. And it's not just the jobs in local government that are important to our economy, it's the jobs that local government generates, and in particular in transportation and transportation projects, because they're the ones who get the federal and state funding. So Jason Wiener has represented Ward 1, basically in the northeast Missoula area on the city council since January 2008. Seems longer, doesn't it? Chairing the Public Works Committee for the duration of his service since 2011, Jason has served as the City Council's representative to the Transportation Policy Coordinating Committee, which is an intergovernmental body that allocates federal transportation money in the greater Missoula area. Currently, Jason serves on the Russell Street Technical Design Team, as well as steering committees for strategic planning and transportation demand management services. He also is a small businessman and has a computer services business, Texarcist.
The Texarcist, yes.
The Texarcist. Jason Wiener. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you all. So government, when it's doing its job well, is a catalyst for 2 things that I think are both really important to our community. And the first is commerce, and that's why you're all here, and that's why you know it. And one of the chief ways that we catalyze commerce is providing infrastructure, the basis for doing business. The other thing that we do is we catalyze culture, which is the community, things that tie us together. Clearly in Missoula, that feeds into our ability to achieve our commercial goals. And transportation is a key part of that when you think about the things that tie us together, that make us a community. This is the stuff that government builds. Transportation infrastructure in Missoula is funded from a variety of sources, and it's kind of a complicated web. It's tough to get a number for the overall investment. This is my first attempt to speak off of one of these, so you'll pardon me if anything goes wrong. But a major piece of that is federal investment in Missoula, and this is the federal transportation bill. And you know, the result was about $13 million in federal fiscal year 2011 of investment. That's down to about $6 million this year. It's projected to go up again to roughly around $10 million during the next 3 years. A lot of that is programmed by the Montana Department of Transportation, and it's dependent on the projects that might come through. But it's about $50 million over 5 years of federal transportation money that's invested. We also get transit money that's programmed about $3 million a year, for instance, into Mountain Line out of the transit bill. The overall amount, which was surprised me with the size of it, and we have some experts here who might be able to correct me on any of these figures, but it was about $65 million from the transit title in the transportation improvement program, which sort of oversees all that. And that, like I said, the lion's share, $3 million a year is to Mountain Line. We see about $300,000 a year to the Missoula Valley Transportation Management Agency, and then there's capital investments that go to a number of different areas. All of that is programmed in a document that we're required to produce by the federal government called the Long Range Transportation Plan. And it is where we say these are our priorities for the community based on the competing goals and interests that are there, that we're always trying to balance in everything that we do, but especially when it comes to transportation investment. We have not had one of those in almost 4 years. And it's a shame because the federal government tells us plan 20 years out into the future and do that every 4 years. But they can't get a bill to us that tells us the basic parameters for doing that planning. So it's always struck me as just a bizarre exercise. Right now, Congress is again trying to get one of these bills through that tells us, here are the parameters. This is how much you're going to have to invest in transportation. Here are the ways in which we expect you to invest it. Right now, we're operating under a 90-day extension. You can imagine that makes it very difficult for us to plan. It also, I think, makes it difficult for the private sector to plan how they're going to staff up to meet the needs of providing the design and construction services that come with that transportation money. So, you know, if you got a second, dial up your senators and representative and let them know it's important for us to get a transportation bill that allows us to plan for the long-term future. A lot of our infrastructure investment is driven by that. There is local money, of course, that's going into this. Of the overall general fund support that comes off your local property tax bill, about 8 to 9% of it goes into engineering and the streets division of the city department. Overall, it was about $2.5 million to street maintenance last year. Most of that, $1.8 million, is to personnel. And I know Steve King is here, or maybe he was, but oh, he had to go, so he won't be available to correct me. But that's partially funded by a city gas tax. The city's share of the gas tax, which is about $1.1 million per year. An interesting fact about the gas tax is that it is not a percentage tax, it is a per gallon tax. It has not gone up since 1993. So it's not indexed to inflation, and it hasn't changed. And what that means is its purchasing power has declined precipitously over the course of the last 20 years. We buy less with the amount of money that we have, and the amount of money is not changing as the cost of goods go up. And there's also, as I said, property, that balance there is made up by general fund from property tax levy, as well as the road district that we have that allows us to do some new programs and things like that. I'm really sort of above the level of what individual projects we're doing. It's not my area of expertise. We get presented the work plan, but you know, our engineers are inventorying pavement conditions and doing what they can to fix it as it goes. You see they're out on Front Street this morning. That's really a catch as catch can, but that's what we do. And then we have major projects each year that we undertake. Last year we did 5th, 6th Arthur in cooperation with the university. That was a really great collaboration among the local government, the state, and the university to get a project that really worked for the neighborhood. WGM, Nick's firm, provided terrific support services on that. Some things that we have coming up that I'm sure that you're interested in, major initiatives, is of course Russell Street. We finally got an environmental impact statement, which gives us the parameters, and now we can go to design. On May 24th, we're going to be interviewing 2 teams of consultants who have provided a statement of qualifications. They're going to give us a proposal on how they'll see us through this project. Our goal is to get a bridge on the ground in 2014. That's aggressive, but that's what we're aiming towards. And it'll start this summer by doing the design of the road, and there'll be a lot of opportunity for people along the road and throughout the community to participate in what it's going to look like when it's on the ground. But whatever it looks like, it's going to be a lot better than we have right now. We're talking about trail connections under the bridge to unite both sides of Russell Street. We're talking about curbs and sidewalks along one of our busiest streets in town. It's really a shame that we don't have that. We're talking about a 4-lane bridge, and I think a lot of mobility improvements throughout the corridor. So stay involved in that as it comes along. We're also going to be working even quicker towards improvement of 3rd Street. We are again engaged in design, and that'll be a little bit accelerated of the Russell Street design, because it's just not as complex. We just awarded the first phase of that to WGM. They're going to do the design work on that road, and we're going to get it under construction with local money, impact fees, and property tax, and our share of gas tax next year if we can. So the long-range transportation plan, despite the lack of a transportation bill, is under revision. May 3rd is the next opportunity for you to weigh in that. And that is really the large-scale questions about whether we're investing in expanding roadways, rehabilitating what we've got, investing in transit service, allocating money to construction of bicycle pedestrian facilities, safety programs, transportation demand management programs. It's the big picture, the whole ball of wax. There are pieces that we're looking at. In particular, we're reviewing the travel demand management services we do, and this is basically what do we do to provide people options, incentives to do something other than travel by themselves in their car, because it takes a lot more road if everybody's in the car by themselves than it does if people get around basically any other way. So it's really easy to be cost effective with those programs because the cost of expanded roadways is so high. At the same time, while Missoula's realized that, we've done it in a number of ways. I mean, we've got 5 or 6 different agencies that provide some sort of TDM service, and what we really need are some across the board benchmarks on cost and cost effectiveness that let us know where our first dollar of investment is the most effective and where our next dollar of investment is most effective, and how it competes with all the other needs we have. Mountain Line is also doing a comprehensive operational analysis right now, which is really saying what should the bus system attempt to do over the next 20 years. And it's been a really interesting process to look at that. This long-term system design, it looks at land use, and it really is struggling with the competing goals of providing a high level of service in a more compact area versus providing connectivity to sort of far-flung areas. And so you can imagine there are benefits to both of those. But transit is a real catalyst for investing in land use if there's stability in it and if there's enough frequency to drive people to use it. And the final thing that the City Council is doing, we do this every year, is we try to build sidewalks and complete a pedestrian network. And I'm pretty excited about 2 projects in my neighborhood, which is the bottom part of Van Buren Street. We're going to get some sidewalks built along there, sort of stabilize that roadway, and then getting a sidewalk on Lolo Street so that there's a connection from the West Rattlesnake to the East Rattlesnake. And those have been a long time coming, and I'm pretty excited that I could be a part of that. The only thing that makes building sidewalks difficult, the main thing, is how we pay for them, which is if you're next to the sidewalk, you pay for the sidewalk. And as we view pedestrian facilities as a community resource, assessing individual people for them strikes people as unfair, particularly if they're the individual. And it's how we've built our sidewalk network in this town, right down to the sidewalks outside of this building. But City Council is trying to look at a way to share the cost around the city, to allocate it rather than taxing somebody $8,000 in a given year to build the sidewalk on their block, to run it sort of like an insurance program, because we're going to come for your sidewalk sooner or later, and if you pay a little bit every year, then you can dilute the pain, and we can get a community resource that we need throughout the community without unfairly burdening the individuals who might just happen to be along the route. And right now we're designing that program, and council will be debating it. We haven't scheduled a public hearing yet, but I expect something during the summer. I'll be happy to take your questions and to be shuffled off by Nick.
Perfect. Perfect timing. So before you go, before you give him a round of applause, I talked about local government in terms of their role in the economy, but I want to talk about another really important aspect of local government for business people in the community. And that is when you have a local government that is consistent, predictable, and fair, that allows the business people of the community to invest in this community. And that's really the heart of the partnership. Transportation is a big part of it. You've been a great council person, and thank you for coming today. All right. All right, so John, Sean, Brigida, Wolf, have you got a question for us?
We do indeed, Dick.
We have a number of questions for you.
But I have just one.
Just one? Okay, our biggest concern at our table seemed to be the low-cost airfare. We all recognize that, it's going to be an economic driver for this community to get a low-cost carrier in here. And we're just wondering if anyone is aware, and particularly Chris is aware, of an effort that is being made at the time to provide the revenue guarantee similar to what the community of Bozeman has done.
So, Jason, you want to answer that?
Sten?
Mike, anybody?
So, yes, the answer is yes, and obviously Brigida is sitting at your table. MEP, I hope I'm okay, Nick, I'm standing up here again. So, we have not had a group really in the past that was set up to properly address this issue. And in fact, 5 years ago, this really wasn't an issue that communities were dealing with. This is really a recent phenomenon. With the formation of MEP, Missoula Economic Partnership, we really now have a group that's kind of bringing all of the business partners together and actually is starting to have that conversation and leading the charge. And in fact, Regina's kind of put together a sheet that I hope maybe she has more of. It looks like she has shared them with her group even. That might be interesting for people because it kind of gives just a quick summary of the effect and then some of the communities that Frontier, and we really are focused on Frontier at this point, but that they serve. So you could look and see how that might benefit your specific business. But the thing to remember again is that airfare will come down in general. And so what we're talking about and what we've seen in other communities is organizations, in our case probably MEP, reaching out to business partners in the community and saying, listen, if the fares were to go down by 10% or 11%, or in Great Falls' case 40%, would it be worth contributing a small amount of money, a small portion of your travel budget, to try to incentivize that airline to come to the community? You know, obviously, if the airline comes in the way it works, and they're financially successful, which is what we would hope for, you don't spend any money. But if it takes them a month or two before they become financially successful in your community, then you subsidize, if you want to use that word, for a short period of time. And so that's kind of where we're at today. I don't know where John went. No, there he is. Did that answer the question?
It does. It does.
Plus he's out of time. Thanks.
Plus I'm okay, thanks.
I love this job. Do you have a question for us?
We do. It's more for Sten. And as consumers in this community, practically everything that we eat, except maybe the seafood special at the restaurants, comes into town via truck. And so our question has to do with the stability of the labor pool, given the other dynamics in the country. And maybe a better way to say that is, what's the risk to this community of strike or labor shortage in terms of availability of goods?
Well, at this point, there's very little risk to strike, as trucking's been deregulated. Not every company, but most all the companies out there are independent. And striking against such a diverse group of companies, they're spread all over the country. And servicing Missoula, companies from all over the country actually deliver goods into Missoula. It's not just companies based here. So I don't think there's any risk there at all. Having labor available to do the job is probably the problem. There's a prediction that we're facing when demand returns and the national economy turns around and trucking starts to take off again, there's going to be a huge shortage for drivers. I think that probably will only drive prices up and labor will follow. But I don't think there's a risk of not getting those goods.
Excellent. Thank you, Sten. And Wolf's ears perked up when you said jobs, because he chairs, or is in transition to chairing the Workforce Development Committee for the Chamber of Commerce, and works very closely with the COT to make sure we train for temporary needed jobs in the community. That's a great question. So we move around the room. Do we have did you guys come up with a preferred alternative?
We did.
Thanks, Dan.
Actually, those guys stole our first priority question. They must have embedded someone here and heard it about the travel, the air travel, and the importance to the community of having a low-cost carrier. So that was our number one. Number two was, it was actually a rail link question regarding the future of the Bitterroot line and whether or not that is something that is in expanse mode for Montana Rail Link. And as a combination, another question here, what about people mover? Has Rail Link looked in or thought about any combination with Amtrak and people moving?
Both good questions and have been brought up on multiple occasions. First, on the freight aspect of the Bitterroot branch, as we call it, We will continue to work with the companies that are down there. There's 5 companies that have agreed to partner up and guarantee a certain level of freight service so that we can have a number to hang on in terms of how much maintenance we can do and everything else. And that's an opportunity that we'll continue to partner with those folks down there. In addition, we have every vested interest to help try and grow business down there. And this will buy us both, the Bitterroot community as well as ourselves, more time to try to understand what other businesses we can develop down there for freight transportation. The Bitterroot line's got some challenges in terms of keeping that maintenance-wise and everything else. If we don't have the freight to support it, and there's not any government money or anybody else's money coming into the maintenance aspect of it, we're left to do that on our own. So it's really bore on the backs of the transportation dollar that's down there. In terms of the people mover aspect of it, there's been a lot of conversation, and there's a small but very vocal group of people talking about the possibilities of passenger service, if you will. And I'd have to say, you have to walk before you run in terms of moving the public anywhere. And Jason would probably speak to this as well. If a bus service was in place first and that was overwhelmed in terms of opportunity, then it would make more sense to get into a situation of moving people by rail. It's romantic to think that we can move people by rail out of the Bitterroot, but in terms of the number of grade crossings we have that cause the train to have to go slow, everything else, and then landing it just once a day in Missoula, and then everybody would have to make that train to get home. It's not like light rail in, let's say, Portland, where every 5 or 10 minutes you can hop on the light rail at a stop. So it's fraught with challenges that way. So I guess we go back to the fact, if you end up having enough commuters that would pool together and go by bus, and we could maybe migrate to that next step of conversation.
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate that. Thank you, Dan, and your group. What do we come up with over here?
Well, actually to kind of follow up with the bus conversation, and my question, it really is directed to Jason. You had talked about the concept of if we could get away from everyone driving in their cars by themselves, this concept of commuting in the community. A lot of that, looks at the mountain line system and what it is today, and some of the changes that could happen in order to generate the environment where we increase the amount of users on the bus system. If Mountain Line was able to make changes to have maybe more frequent schedules, more stops, would it be possible to set up some sort of financial incentive for some of the larger businesses if they had 20 or 30% of their employees commuting on the bus, or some sort of way to generate some of the bigger businesses to really encourage their employees to get on the bus and do that?
It's an interesting idea. I'm not familiar with a program that provides a direct incentive to employers like that. We do work with, say, the Downtown Association, where part of their membership is a pass to allow their employees to ride the bus for free, but that's something a little different than what you're talking about. I think it's a really interesting idea. When you have a big concentration of employees at a certain location, it certainly does provide an opportunity to work with employers, to talk with employees about how they get to work and what are the possibilities. I worked out at DirecTV for a while, and I mean, that's a parking lot that overflows whenever their employees are out there. And it's because of the availability of different ways to get out there. I mean, I try to ride my bike, but at 6 in the morning, a 5-mile bike ride to work is a challenge, even for the most dedicated. So that's that's why we have an agency like Missoula in Motion that works directly with employers to help their employees plan. I don't know if we've ever thought about doing something other than providing the service, but Nancy Wilson is here from ASUM Transportation. There's a giant employer, they provide their own TDM. Nancy, are you aware of programs along the lines of what's being discussed?
Well, the only thing, it's more to the employee. There's tax incentives that you can offer your employees themselves to not drive. So, and I don't know a lot about those tax incentives, but I know that Missoula in Motion does. So that would be the people you'd want to talk to if you wanted to provide that as a benefit to your employees to not drive. They can get a tax incentive for that. So,
there's a federal benefit of the commuter tax benefit that's currently set for reauthorization in the next transportation bill. I think it allows employees to deduct, I think it's up to $160 a month for transit expenditures for commuting.
Great, and what's that little event coming up in Missoula? Is it next week? Bus?
Bike
walk?
Oh, bike walk last week. Yeah.
Say it quick, say it fast, 3 times.
Like what, bus week?
You're doing way better than I did. All right, you've got you guys, questions answered. That's it. Everybody's had a chance to ask a question. Any other questions? We have a little bit of time. Something you're dying to know? Yeah.
You know, I just want to follow up on that question about public transit and why or how it could work better in Missoula. And, you know, most of the folks that I talk to when I say, hey, how come you don't ride the bus into work or ride it to wherever life's taking you? And the number one response is it just doesn't run frequent enough. When I have to wait for an hour or a half an hour for that bus to get to the stop, it really just kind of crashes my whole day. And so I think, you know, as the public moves forward with Mountain Line and its planning efforts, that's really a key goal, is how do you get more frequency with the buses and how do you do it cost effectively and within a budget that you can afford. And so I think that it goes hand in hand with the incentives that the employer would provide to the employee. So just a follow-up note.
Okay. Thank you. You know, as we think about that, because we just moved our offices over to East Broadway. So if I go from East Broadway over to Reserve Street in the vicinity of Southgate Mall or Community Hospital, that's a 20-minute drive. Unbelievably, it's a 20-minute drive. And that 20-minute wait for the bus seems relatively small as you really think about the transportation times in Missoula to get from one side of town to the other. Any other conversation relative to that question in the panel? Chris, someone else?
No.
Yes.
I just wanted to clarify what your question was. If it was just talking about incentives for employers to get their, offering a fare incentive, like a free fare or a bus pass, or are you talking about partnering with an employer to in some way subsidize Mountain Line's operating costs?
I was actually thinking more along the lines of, is there a way for a business to get some sort of financial incentive from the city or in order to promote 20 or 35% of their users to use the bus?
Okay.
In order to free up some of that, you know, usage on the main roads.
So we're talking, yeah, about some fare incentives, and so Jason did.
Yeah, you know, I mean, there's some indirect ways, particularly if you're building something that's new. We have parking requirements, and parking is really expensive to build. And our zoning ordinance allows for alternative compliance with parking. So travel demand management strategy would be one way that you reduce the amount of parking that you have to provide. The other thing is that, you know, if it's a really big project, you're gonna have to do some kind of a traffic impact study. And I think if you can make a convincing case again that you're not gonna have every person who gets there in a car by themselves, then you could diminish what is a very large fixed cost when you're doing something new.
And the engineering firms in Missoula have gotten together, and any new subdivisions won't have outlets or inlets, so the cars will stay inside. Thanks for thinking about that. All right, so the other thing we talked about is what would be a good topic for one of our forums. Anybody have any idea? Oh, Rashida.
Wait, actually, somebody else in our group had a great question about an intermodal facility in Missoula.
Oh, right, it was, the question came up, I think, from you, Nick, that, you know, what's the intermodal train trucking link in Missoula, and you're saying that, you know, for Jones Brothers, it's not necessarily there. Is that because we just aren't shipping things out anymore, or is it a lack of an intermodal hub, that kind of infrastructure?
I think that most of the infrastructure for rail truck traffic is occupied by CTA Architects now, above the Orange Street Bridge. That's what the terminal was. It's really not a rail truck terminal, Mike, that I'm aware of in Missoula at this point.
No, and in fact, Montana Rail Link, with our contract with the Burlington Northern Santa Fe, we don't have the authority to handle containers on our line. And where they do intermodal distribution and truck transfer sort of stuff is where they have a pretty good equilibrium of loads and empties of those containers. Because we're a consumer state, so if we just brought stuff in and there isn't a load to go out, then they've got an empty haul back with that container. It's kind of a wasteland for them in terms of the containers. That's a problem. And it's been tried a couple, 3 times by kind of the central corridor of our state, looking at what can we do to pool those sorts of things. Very difficult challenge.
Sten could talk about it more than I could, but there were certain federal regulations relative to the trucking industry and certain things that happened that really made long-haul trucking, instead of freight terminals from rail, a better way to do things. And that's another conversation another day. Speaking of another conversation another day, any suggested topics for the Chamber forums? All right, with that, oh, Jason, sorry.
I'm interested in learning more about banking. I mean, finance is this increasingly large part of our economy, and understanding the lay of the land in local banking, how much is national players and what local players see would be very interesting.
How much surplus money is in our banks that we might want to borrow to stimulate the economy? That's a good one. Anybody else? All right, thank you to First Interstate Bank for supplying the room and the venue. Really appreciate it. Hope you all have a great time. Don't get up yet. I want to thank the Missoula Area Chamber of Commerce staff, our CEO, Kim Luttrell, thank you. Steve Maurer, who put this whole show together. Steve did a great job and a great turnout. Kimberly and Sarah, thank you very much for your support. The Missoula Area Chamber of Commerce is a relevant and credible voice for Missoula business. These forums are one of the outreaches that we use to help inform the Chamber of Commerce members of what we do and what we're about, and what we do strategically in this community to move business forward. Thank you to Jason Wiener, the Missoula City Council, and the Texarcist, Technical Computer Support, for giving us your time today. I want to thank the Missoula County Airport Authority for Chris Jensen's time, for Jones Brothers Trucking, for Sten Sohlberg, and for Montana Railing, for Mike McKay. A big round of applause for When Mountain Water Company sends 4 people to a meeting, you have to like that company. So if you haven't gone on Facebook and liked Mountain Water Company, you need to go on Facebook and like Mountain Water Company so that we can get more money for the Carrots Park rebuild. Thank you. Have a good afternoon.